Welcome to Live the Dream with yours truly, Marty Kaiser. Buckle up and let's get started. Happy Friday, everyone. This is Marty Kaiser with our Friday Real Estate Tidbits. Hope everyone is doing well and looking forward to a great weekend. We are recording this on Thursday afternoon as I have a huge Friday, so wanted to make sure we recorded this today. So today we're going to have kind of a continuation of what we did on Tuesday. And we're going to go over more real estate related concepts and things people should look for and such. So what I wanted to go over today is I wanted to go over a couple topics that I thought it's important that people give some thought to. These are both for buyers and sellers, probably a little bit more slanted to buyers, but they're for both parties. Okay, so the topics are as follows. Why is pre-approval for a buyer so important? Well, I'll tell you, there's a few reasons. And sometimes when you visit with a buyer and the buyer doesn't know you as an agent, they haven't dealt with you before, sometimes they're a little reluctant to get into their financial issues, either with you or the lender. But here's why it's so important. Number one, the buyer needs to know exactly what they're qualified for. So for example, if you have a buyer that tells you about various houses, and let's say the average price of the houses they're looking at is $550,000, that's great, and obviously you would love to show them and hopefully have them transact on one of those. But you need to know if they're qualified for that. So their qualification is going to be based on, well, how much of a down payment are they working with? Do they have the funds for closing expenses? How's their credit history? And then what does their income and expense ratios qualify them for? Because the lenders all use a certain formula, and what they look at is your house payment relative to your debts that show up on a credit report that are not paid off monthly. And then they also look at your total expenses, meaning your house payment, as well as all your other debts, to come up with the second ratio. So it's important that we know that. For example, if somebody wanted to look at a $550,000 purchase and they're only qualified for $475,000, you'd be wasting the buyer's time, you'd be wasting your own time, and you'd be wasting the seller's times. And there's no benefit to it, because what happens frequently in that scenario is the buyer may find a house that they love, but they're not qualified for it. So they'll compare future houses to something they love, but they have no possibility of buying that house at the present time. So it's important that we have a concise amount for that. Now, there might be isolated cases where the buyer says, gee, I'm only qualified for $475,000, but I don't really like houses in the $475,000 range in the neighborhood I'm going to be at. Well, their alternative then, if they want to continue looking at 550 or houses above that, is they have two alternatives. They either have to get a co-signer, which usually would be a parent or close relative, or they could decide to wait. Waiting means that maybe their income will improve, maybe they'll have more money saved up, something along those lines. So that's why it's so crucial to do those things at the beginning of the process. Also, excuse me, the seller wants to have confidence that when they're letting people into their house to view their house, that their realtor has done the proper initial due diligence and has verified that that buyer is qualified for that price range. Because the last thing a seller wants to do is accept an offer and then have the financing for that buyer declined. So not only is the seller dealing with disappointment, but they've wasted time. They might have taken the house off the market for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks. And of course, they have to have plans to move, so they've got a lot of balls that they're juggling. So it's really imperative that the buyers get pre-approved first. And some buyers are reluctant to do that, but I'm not embarrassed by any means in explaining to the buyers the reason for that and why it would be counterproductive for them to view a bunch of homes until we've had that step taken care of. And the thing is, there is no cost or obligation if they're pre-approved. And they don't even have to use that lender if they have another lender that they prefer using. Typically, when I have a buyer pre-approved, there's a few lenders that I work with that I have the utmost confidence in, so that if those lenders give me a positive evaluation of that buyer, then I know that the deal is going to close hopefully pretty smoothly. If, on the other hand, I get a lender that I'm confident with that says, well, your buyer may or may not get approved, and here are the reasons why, then I have to have a frank discussion with that buyer about the pros and cons of their particular situation. If, on the other hand, the lender says that there's no way they're going to get approved at that price point, then we also know that and have to make a decision. Are they going to look at less expensive houses, or are we going to have to reformat what they're doing to most effectively serve their needs? So that would be step number one in the process. Step number two, along with that, is having a detailed discussion with the buyers of the criteria that are most important to the buyers. For example, do they need to be in a certain school district? If so, that's going to obviously tell you where you have to look for homes. If they don't have to be in a certain school district, for example, but they want to be in an area where the schools are rated a certain way by, let's say, Orange County has FCAT ratings, so schools can get an A, B, C, or D rating. And let's say, like a lot of folks, they want to have their kids in an A-rated system. Well, then that's a criteria for us. They may have work commuting requirements, like they may work in downtown Orlando, and they don't want to have a drive more than 30 minutes to their workplace. So that's a criteria. They may want to be within a certain distance of the theme parks. So could be a criteria. Or maybe they're a customer that travels a lot for work and wants to be in a certain driving distance of the international airport that we have. So there's a lot of things that we like to ascertain up front so that we can serve that customer better and hit as many of their criteria as possible. Then we go to the housing portion. Well, how many square feet approximately are they hoping for, that what we call heated and cooled square feet? Are they open to a 1 or a 2-story house, or do they want to focus on one or the other? If it's a 2-story house, does the primary bedroom need to be on the first floor, or are they open to having it being on the second floor? What type of upgrades are they requiring? For example, like with the kitchen, are they requesting that it has to have granite countertops? Does it need newer appliances? Or are the purchasers ready to update those after they own the home? There's just a lot of different criteria. They may have criteria about flooring, like they may say they want to have no carpeting in the house. When it comes to major things from a maintenance standpoint, do they want to ensure that the roof is no older than a certain age? We know that historically, especially with the insurance companies, kind of 15 years is the cutoff in many transactions. So how close to that 15-year level is the buyer comfortable buying? Air conditioning is probably the second biggest component. How old does the air conditioner need to be? Again, we know from statistical analysis that typically air conditioners in Florida last anywhere from 12 to 15 years. You may get some exceptions, but these are general guidelines. So those are just some of the things that we look at. Then, of course, does the buyer want a pool? Does the buyer require a fenced yard? Does the buyer require no rear neighbors, meaning that they want maybe to have water in the back, maybe they want to have woods or what we call a conservation area, maybe they want to look out onto a golf course. So that's another set of criteria. And then last but not least, what size garage? Do they must have a 3-car garage, or are they okay with a 2-car garage? So there's a lot of variables, and frequently you're not going to make all of your variables come true depending on your price point and different things. But there's certain things that are must-haves for buyers, and obviously buyers want to check off as many of the things that are important to them as possible. So this just gives you a little bit of an idea of a lot of the information that I try to derive when I'm helping customers. And the more things that the buyer is willing to share with me, then we're going to make better use of our time. I'm going to have a better understanding of what that buyer's requirements are, and I'm going to show the buyer properties that are a lot closer to what their requirements are, so they're going to feel that I'm more effectively doing my job, and we're both going to spend our time more productively. And so I'm big, as you know from listening to me, on detail, communications, and frank discussions with people. And I think that's imperative. You know, when a buyer hires an agent, and especially with the new legal rules where the buyer is actually signing an agreement to hire a buyer's agent, and they have a contractual obligation where they're pretty much only going to work with that agent, it's important that not only do they communicate effectively, but that they have a trust factor, that that customer feels comfortable working with that agent, that they feel that agent's knowledgeable, professional, and is working in that customer's best interest. I kind of equate when you hire an agent, it's kind of a short-term marriage, because until you fulfill your real estate objectives, you're kind of joined at the hip with that agent. So both agent and customer want to make sure that it's a good fit and they're both compatible with one another. There's been occasions, not frequently, but there's been occasions in my career where I meet with somebody and I can tell from my perspective that we're not a great fit. But I may have somebody on my team that I feel would be a much better fit with them due to personalities or different things that I just feel they would be better suited. Some customers may feel more comfortable working with a female agent. Other customers may feel more comfortable working with a male agent. So the better the fit, the more successful the interaction is going to be. So I do take all those things into account. So let's say we've satisfied all those things, and now we're ready to actually do our research on properties and start pulling properties up. Okay, so I get a hold of my buyers and I send them a bunch of candidate homes that I feel are close to what their requirements are. And the buyer says they'd like to look at these various homes. So obviously there's a lot to it, but I'll kind of simplify it. So I try to, at least for the first visit with the buyers, limit how many homes they look at. I don't force them to follow my recommendation, but I highly encourage it. When a buyer looks at too many homes, they start getting just kind of jumbled in their mind, and they have a hard time remembering, especially, let's say they wanted to look at 8 homes, and let's say by the time you got to the 6th or 7th home, they don't remember the first or second home as much. So it's not as productive, and they're less prone to have a more finite opinion of something that they really liked or didn't like. So that's why I think it's important, if at all possible, to try to limit how many homes you show somebody at one time. And then, so let's say the buyers agree with you for that. So then when you're, after you've shown the homes, if you have the time and scheduling, it's best to sit down with the folks and go over what they've looked at and see if there's some homes they want to eliminate, if they have a home that they fell in love with, or if they have a top candidate that they want to consider moving forward on. And to assist them in this, I always recommend a couple of things to the customer. When they go through a home that they might have an interest in, I tell them to do 2 things. A, to take pictures, assuming they have a cell phone that takes pictures, which most of us do nowadays. And B, to have a checklist. So they can say house number 1 on ABC Street. Here are the things that were pros. Here are the things that were cons. And they do that for every home that they don't eliminate. So this way, when you're sitting down after viewing these homes and you're refreshing yourself, not only do you have pictures, oh yeah, that's the one that's got the quartz countertops. I love that kitchen. But also it has a checklist, like maybe they had 10 criteria and they satisfied 8 of them. And the 2 that they didn't satisfy were not super critical. So that's probably a good candidate home for them. On the other hand, if they had a couple of criteria that were absolute things and that particular home didn't include those, then that might be a reason to eliminate those things. So that's why when I recommend these things, and if my customer's aligned with me and follows my recommendations, it's going to be a much superior experience, and we're going to have a much better time of finding the right house for those customers. Also, I know with a lot of customers, they would rather find a house sooner rather than later if the home met most of their requirements. The things that are kind of nuanced with both buyers and sellers, and I'll put you first in the buyer's shoes. First time you've taken a buyer out, so you've scheduled 5 homes. So the first home that you showed them, they loved. I mean, they loved this home. They couldn't stop talking about it. And it met almost all, if not all, of their critical components. So now we get back to the office and we go over those. And when we're talking, they say, that first home was, God, that was a great home. So then we discuss it a little bit, and I say, okay, well, just from talking with you and doing various things, it seems like that home's an ideal home for your situation. Would you like to pursue that home and have me help you prepare an offer? And assuming they say yes to that, then I go over the process and my negotiating recommendations and all the other things. But you're going to get a percentage of buyers that say, gee, this is the first day we've looked, and I'm just not comfortable making a decision after only looking at 5 homes. So I certainly understand that. At the same time, I would probably try to get into a more involved conversation with them somewhere in the following fashion. You know, we've looked at 5 homes, but this first home checks all your boxes. You just love this home. And you may or may not find a home similar to this in the upcoming future. And the thing that I always recommend, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, if we met a home that meets all your requirements, it's in an area that you like, a school system that you like, the house has got the various features that you like, it's in the price range that you like, let's pursue it. There's no reason not to pursue it. And also, if you don't pursue it, it's possible that another buyer is going to come along and love it also, because this is a home that really has a lot of positive attributes, so it may not stay on the market too long. And you're going to be kicking yourself if you delay and it's no longer available. So those are some of the things that I talk about. Obviously, I don't pressure or force a person into pursuing a home. And they may be of the personality set that even though I told them all this, they're not willing to do that. And I just have to accept that and hope that they don't lose out on that home if they come back to it in 3 or 4 days. But that's kind of my mindset in that situation. For the seller, let's say we put a house on the market today, and let's say tomorrow, the second person that looks at the home says they're going to submit an offer, and they come in with a good, solid offer. That's a definite, serious offer, and it doesn't have any major negative red flags that would concern me about trying to finalize an agreement with that particular buyer. Well, most sellers would be thrilled, and obviously we would hopefully put that deal together. But there's going to be a percentage of sellers that say, gee, we just put the house on the market. This is only the first or second person that's looked at it. Maybe we underpriced the home. Maybe we should rethink what we're doing. And again, I understand that from a psychological point of view. But again, if I've given the buyer all the documentation on how I arrived at that price, I've gone over the market trends and doing the due diligence that I need to do to help that seller. I know from experience that frequently your first offer is your best offer. And usually when a listing is newer on the market, you're going to get buyers that are more aggressive because they know it's a newer listing and they have to come in with a stronger offer to encourage that seller to work out an arrangement with them. And occasionally I'll get a seller that just has a strong opinion that they're not willing to go with that first offer in the present form. And sometimes we ended up not doing it. But a lot of the time that seller ends up regretting it because they may not get another offer equal or better than that for quite some time. Or maybe they don't get an offer as good as that. And I take no pride in saying I told you so. So I try to use my professional experience to give them the best guidance I can. So that's a little bit about the process that I entail when I work with a customer, whether it's a buyer or a seller. So I hope that's given you some insight into not only my skill set, the way that I conduct business, but some of the recommendations that I give you. Last but not least, a little sports. We're getting the Oklahoma City, Indiana series is 3-2 in favor of Oklahoma City. We're getting game 6 tonight. Should be a great game. I'm leaning toward Oklahoma City closing it out tonight. So on my next podcast on Tuesday, obviously we'll have the results and we can talk about the series winners, because I think if Indiana wins tonight, they'll still be the game 7 before our next podcast. So that's all for today. Have a great day, a great weekend. Stay safe. This is Marty Kaiser out.